Brad, I'm staying in Wyoming, and we're outside of Yellowstone, and I'm on a bike. I'm biking with my niece, Sophie. She's fantastic. And we're out for, I don't know, mile, 2 mile, 3 mile bike ride. Nothing big, right? Yeah. But as we're biking, we stop at this little kind of somewhat between a pond and a lake, nothing huge, and we're just skipping rocks. And as we're standing there, one of us hears a rustle. I don't remember which one. We turn around, and there is a fully grown female mule deer standing behind us.
Ooh.
And coming towards us. She is not afraid of us. She's just walking right towards us. And we're not necessarily afraid of it. I mean, deers can kick, but we're not necessarily afraid of it, right? So we're just kind of standing looking at it. And then I noticed that this Ford Explorer is coming down the road in our direction. So the mule deer is still kind of half in the road. And there's enough shrub where the car might not see it. You know what I mean? Like there's sage grass that's high, and then there's sagebrush, but anyway. So I kind of flag down the Explorer, and I go, "Hey, just heads up, there's a deer ahead, just so you don't be careful." And the woman, who is clearly a local, and who is kind of annoyed that I flagged her down, is like, "Oh, a deer in Wyoming, and what a shock this could be to all of us." And I realized that, like, city boy over here is like trying to stop an accident from happening. Oh, there's a deer. No one's ever seen a deer before. She means to go slow, drive so slow. And this woman, who clearly is from Wyoming, mud all over her Explorer, she's fine. Yeah. She's like, "Yeah, genius. I got 6 in my backyard as we speak. That's not a problem."
Oh, stop. Hey, well, I noticed you were about to go swimming. Before you go, I saw there was some fish in the lake. I just wanted you to know. I just wanted you to know about the fish in the lake.
Oh, ma'am, slow down, quick. Yeah, window comes down. Yeah, what is it? Did you look at those mountains? They're beautiful. The Grand Tetons, they're gorgeous. One of the most wonderful mountain ranges in America. Window goes back up, takes off immediately. Yeah, so you can take the city boy and put him in Wyoming. He's still going to be an idiot, and put him in Wyoming. God. That's the lesson for today, my friend.
The real funny thing is if she would have driven off and immediately ran into the deer.
And just but actively swerves into the deer, just like city boy, just yells as she drives off. Oh,
shoves him off the side of the road.
On that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, there's a deer over there. Let's talk comics.
So let's talk comics, my friend. I didn't give you the full list. Did I ever give you the full list of all the animals that I saw in
No, I didn't realize you were making a list. That was something to do.
This is how big a city boy I was. Okay, so I saw a black bear, moose, bison, otters, elk, white-tailed deer, mule deer, a snake, ospreys, bald eagles, hawks, golden eagles rather, a bird called Lewis's Nutcracker, which I laughed at when I heard that name, because imagine you're Lewis and Clark and you get a fucking bird named after you named Lewis's Nutcracker. You're like, oh, thanks. I appreciate this, everybody.
Imagine you're Lewis's wife.
Imagine you're Lewis's nuts. I mean, the whole thing, it gets real complicated real quick.
Yeah, that can be tough.
Anyway, this is a big shout out to Yellowstone, the coolest national park in America, and I will not hear anything saying otherwise. Brad, by the way, one thing that America does right, national parks. Holy hell, that thing is cool.
Yes. Oh, and by the way, you can have this kind of fun in any place you are. You don't have to be in a national park to make a list. Just last week, coming into the studio on the subway, I saw 3 rats, a cockroach, and what I think was a stray cat.
Oh my God. It is funny to see the comparison of city life versus country life. Did you ever see the video of the rat in New York that had the whole pizza slice? God, that warmed my heart.
Yeah, I saw that.
And the fact that it was lifting it up the stairs, that was the most New York rat thing to do.
Yeah, you almost expected to see a roll of cigarettes rolled up in the t-shirt sleeve there.
Hey, pal, I'm a rat over here. Hey,
I'm doing rat things.
So, Brad, I got a topic that I wanted to jump us into this week because it's been weighing on my heart, and it's a weighty one. So I'm going to keep this one super anonymous because there is no. I love this artist; they are very talented, and there's no need to throw them under the bus. But I was speaking, and Brad was witness to the conversation. I was speaking to a cartoonist that I love and admire, and they were having a real breakdown because let's just say they work for either Marvel or DC, and they've had a 10 or 15 year, 20-year run with them.
Yeah.
And they were getting cut loose, basically. The house style, as we've talked about before, is changing, and they're on their own. And we could just say that maybe they're a winner, a major award winner in cartooning. They have incredible skill. They have decades of work and experience behind them.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what the next step would be. In a really heartbreaking way, they didn't know what the next step would be. And I said, well, you gotta, it's going to be hard and it's going to take you a couple of years, but you've got to own and control your own stuff. This is, or this will keep happening. You can't rely. I mean, we all know, Brad, from our grandparents on, that you can't rely on corporate America to be like, you got our back, we got your back. You know what I mean? We're going to stick with you.
Yeah, the whole lie, the whole thing about pensions and job security, that's all turned out to be a lie. That by the way, hit my parents' generation. The whole lie of pensions and stability. It's getting to the point where my generation and the generations lower down don't really have a right to be surprised by this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And corporations have sort of having switched from pensions to 401k, and then sometimes not even offering 401ks anymore. Anyway, where I'm going with this, though, is that the problem for this much beloved artist, having put all their eggs into the basket of either Marvel or DC, it doesn't matter which that I'm talking about, now in their late 40s to late 50s, I actually don't know, they now have a major crisis on their hands.
Yeah.
Whereas owning and controlling your own business and all the small, manageably sized mistakes that you could make in starting that process that we advise about, I lost $500 here. Oh, I made a poor choice there. But they're all manageably sized. But now this artist is facing mortgage-sized mistakes in terms of oh no, what do I do? Because I've put all my eggs in this corporate basket.
Right. Now, I assume you told this person, well, listen, you need to own and control your own work. You need to get started focused on your next Kickstarter. You might want to think about, other crowdfunding like Patreon and so forth. What was the response to that advice?
So this is the part that broke my heart, and the part that I wanted to talk about was they were like, I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. I'm an artist. I don't know how to do business, right? And I was very sympathetic in the moment, and I'm still sympathetic in the moment. It's hard. The whole thing is hard. But the bottom line is, and this is the advice and the topic that I'd like to talk about today, is what other choice do we have other than learning business?
Right.
Because if you want to be the artist, it's like, I'm just an artist. Someone else will handle the publishing. I'm just an artist. Someone else will handle the marketing. Someone else will handle the publicity or the sales or the fulfillment. You can do that. That is a valid option for a small slice, a percentage of artists. Yes, you can do that. The risk you have long-term in your career is what this dear artist is facing, that they're now in their 40s and 50s. They have a tremendous skill set, but they don't know and don't think they have the ability to learn the business side of things, of owning and controlling. Basically, the salvific path that could save them, which granted is going to be a lot of work, they now think they can't do it because they never made the manageably sized mistakes and the slow incremental learnings of owning and controlling your own business.
Yeah. And it goes to the heart of what we talk about on this show every week, which is owning and controlling your own business. And if you're starting out, or if you've been doing this for a few years, and you're in that pro-am intermediate range, this is the time to learn this stuff, to learn business, to learn how to run a Kickstarter, how to do your own marketing, and so on and so forth, because the stakes are small right now. You've got very small stakes. Like if you launch your first or second Kickstarter and it doesn't reach its funding goal, that's okay. That's okay, right? It's okay to miss a funding goal. It's okay to make a mistake on your first Kickstarter, right? And all the mistakes that you make right now as you're just starting out, as you're learning how to run your own business, those are all manageable mistakes. They don't feel like it at the time, right? No mistake feels good while you're making it, but you're learning, you're gaining valuable knowledge, you're making mistakes that hopefully they sting enough that you never make them again. And you learn along the way. It's all time well spent, is what I'm trying to say. And if you do that now while the stakes are low, if you learn how to do business now, it's something that's going to be by your side and something you can apply as things get bigger. You just apply that business experience to bigger and bigger situations. But the other side of that is getting involved with corporate comics and ending up 20 years down the road, being cut loose, having nothing really to show for your career in comics and nowhere to turn, right? Because what is she going to do? Turn to Brad Geiger and say, hey, would you publish my comics? Well, technically, I guess I could, but I can't. Right? Unless I stop working on my own stuff, I can't start working on your stuff. And and most of us, the people that have put careers together in independent comics, are very, very small operations. We can't take on other people's work.
And I want to say this because in light of the fact that Brad and I have been trying to pay forward what we've learned in our career for the better part of a decade now, we've done Comic Lab, we've done Webcomics Weekly, we did How to Make Webcomics, we did the Webcomics Handbook. Yeah. All of these are basically trying to say, hey, learn from us. We have made these mistakes. So don't do these 17 things, do these 17, right? A version of that is what we've been trying to do for 10 years. Anyway, because we've been putting ourselves out there publicly and saying like, hey, let's talk about how we can make a career in comics. Right. We get a lot of people coming up to us like this cartoonist did in person, in a bad moment in their career. Right. So I want to say to this cartoonist and anyone listening that I'm not specifically talking about you. It is, we have had this exact same conversation with people from Marvel, from DC, from United Media, from Andrews McMeel, from Scholastic, from Boom Studios. I cannot tell you, people like, I had 3 books with Boom, now they won't do business with me anymore. And what do I do? I had all this syndicated stuff with Andrews McMeel, and now they won't do business with me. What do I do? Marvel or DC cut me after the house style changed. What do I do? Right? Like, I am not kidding that we've had this exact same conversation, and the panic kicks in, and I see us, Brad, by the way, having this exact same conversation 5 to 10 years from now with some Webtoons folks. Like, Webtoons cut me and I don't know what to do, right? Like that kind of thing.
And they were huge names on Webtoons. They were people whose careers you would have been jealous of if you were just looking from the outside. And now they're like, what do I do now? You end up a 50-year-old person with, as harsh as it is to say, no marketable skills. Right. And you got things that nobody is necessarily looking for. You know, who wants a qualified comic artist? Very few people are looking for that at the corporate level.
Yeah. I mean, it's our dear friend Carl Kerschel, who does The Abominable Charles Christopher, among other things. One of the things that I really admire about him is that he has, I think, successfully anticipated this exact problem, which is that eventually DC or Marvel will stop offering work, but he's ready for it. He has built his career. He owns and controls a bunch of his output. He has direct access to his audience. Like, what I'm saying is, if you're going to dip a toe into corporate comics, by God, make sure you maintain direct feed to your audience and maintain your skills of owning and controlling a business and making your own Kickstarters and running your own Patreons and making your own merch and fulfilling your own merch. Yeah. Because eventually that axe will fall, don't you think?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, we've gone down this road so many times. I almost feel like
it's a broken record at this point, you know?
Yeah, it really is. In other words, again, it's 220 years of comics history. And if you look back, you don't see it working out well for very many people who went into corporate comics. It went in fact, Dave and I were talking just before the show. If you take a look at the people who really that you are certain of their financial stability. In other words, it's very easy to look at somebody whose name everybody knows and to assume that that person has financial stability. Right. Well, everybody knows, Joe Schmo.
Brad, they won 3 Eisners. Yeah, they won 3 Eisners.
Right. But you can't assume financial stability. Robert Kirkman, you can assume financial stability. Right.
Yeah.
Walking Dead started out as a comic at Image Comics. Right. That was his creator owned property. You can assume a certain amount of financial stability between Walking Dead and Invincible. You can assume a certain amount of financial stability for Robert Kirkman. Same thing for Todd McFarlane. Very financially stable. Right. In fact, started his own company and does a whole bunch of things now. There's not a whole lot of people that you can be sure of the financial stability of who have turned to corporate comics. And it's been 120 years of this, right? Going back to what I said earlier, we don't have the right to be surprised by it anymore.
Right.
When you see it happening over and over and over again, there was this bright shining spot for newspaper cartoonists in the, I'd say, 50s, 60s, and 70s when newspapers were the dominant media. We had a bright little shining spot if you were the type of person that the syndicates picked up.
Right, which was very specific kind of person and cartoonist style. Yeah.
Yes. And a lot of those cartoonists all had something in common.
See if you can spot it. See if you can spot what it was.
So you can't say it was even a bright shining spot across the board for all creators. What I'm getting at is this is why Dave and I over and over and over again pound the table and say you've got to own and control your own work. And the time is now. If you're just starting out, the time is now. These are small problems and they feel big and they feel embarrassing and all that kind of stuff, but they're surmountable. They are surmountable problems. The problem is when you make a decision that leads you 10, 20 years down the road, hoping that a corporation is going to have your back into your retirement, that's a much bigger problem now.
Yeah. And again, we've said this before, but it's that the idea that surely they know better. Surely they'll handle my career better than I would. Right. Because I'm an idiot. I'm just an artist. I don't know anything. So surely this big company will handle it better.
Right.
And listen, maybe because they've been doing it for 80 years right out of the gate, they'll do it better. But the idea is that that'll eventually come home to roost. Like you're going to get cut, for lack of a better phrase, at some point with them.
Yeah.
And then you're on your own. So how much better to have slow, manageably sized mistakes that you're learning from each time you're getting better and better? Is there embarrassment along the way? Absolutely. I feel embarrassment now. Even now, there's a lot of stuff about maintaining a website that I mess up on a weekly basis, Brad, right?
Right.
I call my friends. I have a network. I read a lot. I try to maintain what I can. I hire people that can do certain things that I can't do. But it's mine ultimately to control. There's no corporation that's going to shut me down. There's no corporation that's going to shunt my project. There's no corporation that's going to say it's greenlit. And then when they get bought out, they shut it down, right?
Dave, I'll give a great example. Just right now, an exact example of what you're talking about. I'm looking at launching a Kickstarter for the first time since 2019 because I hit the brakes during COVID. And then for the next couple of years, I was really focusing on Patreon. Now I'm to the point where it's like, all right, Geiger, you got to get a book out. I want to get this stuff into print. I want to get those books out. And I just got my printer quote back yesterday. True story. And I opened that thing up and I swear to God, it's gibberish. I've got to get back acclimated into doing all that. And believe me, at 54 years old, I wish I could just hand that sheet of paper to somebody and say, do it and make sure it gets done right. Right. I'd love to do that. Here's what I want. It's got to look like this. Make it happen. I've got to now get reacclimated to doing a Kickstarter. I've got to go back, and some of the numbers didn't come back the way I wanted them to. They were a surprise to me. I got to figure out why that is. I'm going to have to spend a couple hours, and I guarantee I'll be on the phone with Dave talking about this and a whole bunch of other stuff that has gone by the wayside in the last 4 years since I haven't been doing Kickstarters. I'm going to be doing a lot of this. It's going to be painful. It's going to be a pain in the ass. It's going to be stressful. Right. But it's way, way better than going out at 54 years old and trying to find a job. Right. I would rather take this pain than that pain. And the only way to get to this from that is to start right now, start small, start making those small mistakes while you've got a chance. Because the stress never goes away. It's not like Dave and I are living in the lap of luxury. With stress-free lives. Far from it, right? It's just that we've chosen the stress that is going to give us the better chance of having a better career over the long haul.
How much better to have the stress that you have control over?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, it's 3 a.m. I'm stressed about this Kickstarter that I have to launch. Well, I know that at 8 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to hit the ground and start calling friends and researching and figuring out what I don't know and making actionable progress on my fears, right? But if my 3 a.m. fears are, oh no, is my editor going to cut me? Oh no, is my company about to be bought out? Oh no, is my publisher changing directions? What the hell action can I take on that?
Right.
You know what I mean?
You got nothing.
So you have to decide which anxiety you want.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And what I'm saying here is what Brad is saying, what we've been saying for the better part of a decade is, choose the anxiety that you have control over. Right. It's a
better flavor of anxiety.
Exactly. I hate the anxieties that I have. I would hate the anxieties of being cut from a publisher at 55 or 58 and being put to the wind and having to go into a service industry because I for 30 years I didn't have any other marketable skills, you know. So I know in your heart, in the same way that Brad and I do when we wake up, you say, I don't want to do that. I want to be an artist. I don't want to be a business person. I get it. What I'm saying is we live in a somewhat magical age where by doing a couple annoying things, you get to be an artist. Right. So do the couple annoying things because it makes your future secure and one that you own and control.
Well, listen, Dave, while we're still in the first half of the show, I've got a business question I want to pitch to you really quick, just to see what your thoughts are on it. This one comes in from Patreon backer Dorian, who says, I've got a question regarding old merchandise. A few decades ago, Dave had a comic on stick figure family car window decals, and this sold some window decals based on this. His audience has undoubtedly cycled a few times since then, so many readers have probably not read the comic. It was pretty funny, or are aware of the merchandise. Before cons, do you ever try to reintroduce this joke to get more sales at the booth? In other words, Dave, when is it the right time to reintroduce old merchandise?
So this is a good question, and this is a really specific product, but I'm going to parallel it with my pug book. So this specific product, like Brad said, it was a decal of and you all remember them, in the 90s, or late 2000s, there was sort of those back window van decals. It was a black strip of color, and then across it was little white iconographic families like Susan, Greg, Bobby, little Jimmy, and then the dog Scooter, and that's the family, right? It's on the back of the van. So I made a joke about that, but it was a sample family, and then at the very end it said Glornak the Destroyer, and it had this like Cthulhu-looking creature at the far end, right?
Right.
It was a fun one-off joke, and enough people clamored for the actual sticker that I made the sticker. Sold about 1,000 of them, 1,500 of them. But here, by the way, way overproduced it. It took me a decade to sell through them, Brad, right? This was early me not knowing that it's better to go low than to go high. At a time, in terms of manageable sized mistakes that we were talking about before, it took me a decade to make my money back on that dang thing, right? Regardless, sold through, great. I was happy with it. However, I still get people, probably 5, a dozen people tops a year, saying, I sold my car, or my car was in an accident, and I'd love to get that bumper sticker again. I don't see it in your store. Can you reproduce it? And listen, it took me the better part of a decade to fix that one mistake. I'm not making another one. I'm not going to reproduce it, right? But, and because I'm savvy enough to know that 5 people don't represent a mass of people asking for a thing,
Yes.
I'm not going to make it, right?
Yes.
Compare that to my pug book, where I did one pug book, black and white. It sold through the first printing. I made a second printing, sold through that. I did a third printing. And then I had so much success with that dang thing that I made a second pug book, right? Another collection, black and white. That one sold through its printing. So then I said, well, why don't I combine the two pug books, make them all color, make it a $30 book instead of a $15 book. I'll have a better, cost of goods sold on it. I did that. It has, and by the way, I intentionally overproduced that one because I knew it had legs.
Yeah.
I will now have pug books ready and in stock for the next 10 years of Comic-Con and online. And so that one I did reintroduce. So the difference there is knowing what people are clamoring for, regardless of what I want, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I would like to have that sticker. Number one, there's not enough margin in a sticker to make the hassle worthwhile, right? You can sell a sticker for $5. Maybe if you're really stretching, I guess you could sell it for 10. That feels like a jerk move. But that margin's not great, right? And in the meantime, I have to carry it for years in order for it to make money. A book, the margin is fantastic. As you remember from past shows, I always try to do 5 times cost of a book, 6 times cost of a book. So I'm making good profit on that book anytime that thing sells. It moves like Brad's seen it in real life. It moves on its own at Comic-Cons. It sells hundreds of copies, right? And so that's great. But what I'm saying is, the market, in order to reintroduce something, the market pressure has to be overwhelming. Otherwise, I guarantee you're going to be sitting on something for years if you reintroduce it.
Right. And that's why I wanted to sneak that one into the first half of the show, Dave, because if you listen to your answer from that question, it's a perfect illustration of what we talked about in the beginning of the show. You made a mistake early on when the stakes were low, so that later on, when the stakes are higher, you can make smarter decisions.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That overbuying, that having to take a bunch of years to sell through those stickers, realizing that it's got a much lower profit margin and therefore it doesn't have the best return on investment for your money or your time.
Right.
All of those things were things that you learned early on in your career when the stakes were low, so that later on you can maximize the return on the time that you do have to put into this, right?
I'm really glad you clarified that. That's exactly the lesson, because it was a hundreds of dollars mistake, not a tens of thousands of dollars mistake, you know?
Right. Yeah. And so I thought it was a great way to cap off this first half of the show is by saying this is an example of what we're talking about. This is how we know not to go out and produce more stickers because of all those things that Dave just got done saying, which is all stuff that he learned when the stakes were low.
And so to specifically answer your question is, how does one know when to reintroduce something?
Yeah.
In some respects, you learn by the contrast that I just told you. The sticker at a $5 price point took me 10 years to sell 1,000, 1,500, doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Even if I had sold them all in 1 year, by the way, it would have been $5,000 of gross, right? So was that worth remaking? No, it took me a decade to sell through the damn thing, right?
Right.
By contrast, the first pug book sold through 3 printings in probably as many years. That's how you know to reintroduce a product is when it moves fast, it moves on its own. It has its own, sales life in a way that kind of surprises you. And by the way, I've had, I don't know, Brad, 16 books at this point, 17 books, maybe more if you include Drive. I think I have only ever reprinted 2 books, one of which was the pug book. Right. And that was only because it sold like freaking hotcakes. So ask yourself, why did Dave Kellett not reintroduce the other Sheldon books? It's because a lot of those took me the better part of a decade to sell through, right?
Right.
That's the lesson, is the market will tell you when something is ready to be reintroduced.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, if you're wondering why I've got this big smile on my face, it's because we've got a special offer to people who are thinking about joining the Comic Lab community. And of course, for people who are already there, if you join us by September 21st, you are going to get, and this is great, it's going to be the live recording of our live podcast at San Diego Comic Convention. If you remember, when we went to Comic-Con International, we recorded a live show. We actually were able to make a recording of that, and we're going to send it out only to Comic Lab community members on Patreon. And of course, if you're already a Patreon backer, you don't have to do a thing. You're going to get this in your private feed. But if you're thinking about joining us, join us by the 21st of September, and you can get access to this amazing show. We had a lot of fun doing this show. We had a lot of laughs. And as long as you're joining at the $5 level or higher, you're going to get this show. So everybody at the $5 tier or higher, new or old, is going to get the live San Diego show. And Dave, it was an absolute blast to record.
Absolutely. One of the things we have loved about doing live shows is the live Q&A at the end. And this was one of the more fun ones we've done. It was a really fun group with fun questions, and I think there's a lot of laughs
good questions.
And just a reminder, when you join us at Comic Lab, you're also getting 5 years now of the ProTips episodes.
Yes,
and these are roughly half-hour shows that we do every week that give you actionable advice for your own cartooning, whether it's at the pro level, pro-am level, amateur level. These are actionable bits of advice for your writing, your drawing, and your business aspects of your cartooning. So you're gonna, when you join us on September 21st at the $5 level, you're gonna get the Comic-Con show. You're gonna get every single episode of Pro Tips that we've ever recorded over the years.
Absolutely. And we're closing in on show number 300, and we've done a Pro Tips for every public show. So that's nearly 300, soon to be 300 Pro Tips that you've got as well, going back through. That has just, we get right down to the nitty gritty. Here's what you need to know. Here's how you can apply it. It's a really, really valuable show. And it's one of the many perks that you're going to get as being a Comic Lab community member through Patreon.
Well, let me just stop you for 1 second, because can you believe that we've done 300 shows almost?
Holy cats. No, it's really like, how do you eat a mountain one spoonful at a time? Yeah. Right. Have you ever heard that old adage? It's kind of like that. What we did was back in 2018, we decided to do a podcast, and you and I are very much the same in that if we're going to do something, we're going to do it. We put it into a routine, and then every Tuesday I turn on the computer. There you are. You look over at your monitor. There I am. And that's it. You look back and it's like, oh, geez, how did you do 300 episodes? Well, every week we recorded an episode, it's just like time flies when you're having fun. Here we are at show 300 pretty soon. And
I will say this to Grad's great praise is that when you are deciding who to do projects with in your own cartooning career, find a fellow artist for whom the seriousness of repetition and stick-to-itiveness is self-evident, because boy, that will come to haunt you with projects if you can tell that it's not there for them in the way it is for you. And Brad has such a stick-to-itiveness and such a professionalism. Every Tuesday when I fire it up there, Brad is on the system already. I'm always 5 minutes late. Brad is always there on time. And a hot day. It has been a fun 300 episodes. Anyway, Brad, jump us into our next one, my friend.
Absolutely. Oh, one more thing. As long as we're tooting our own horn here, here's one more thing you're going to get with your Comic Lab membership through Patreon, and that is access to the Discord server. I just added a new channel to the Discord server called WordPress, because I've been hearing that a lot of people, Dave, are taking our advice about owning and controlling their own work. They're building their own website. Yes. A lot of them are using DreamHost for their hosting, and we're excited about that. But then they get everything up and going, and then they come upon some WordPress problems, like how do I do this? How do I do that?
Right.
And I'm very confident in any number of things that I could talk to you about. I could talk to you about art and writing. I could talk to you about lettering for days on end, but I am not the person to turn to. And I think I can speak to you, Dave. No, neither is Dave. Neither one of us is the person to turn to for tech advice, especially when it comes to WordPress. But we've got a huge burgeoning community of really great people who are super helpful over there in Discord. And I've seen it happen we've got a similar channel for Clip Studio. People post a question, before you know it, bing, bang, boom, it's solved. Even just last week, it was a really weird question. Somebody's saying this weird thing is happening. And somebody came in and said, do you have this, this, and this? And they went and they checked their settings, and sure enough, there was one missing, and they had their problem solved in no time.
Yeah.
So I can't guarantee that's going to happen on the WordPress channel. What I can tell you is that we've created a really great group of people over there, and you've got a really good chance of getting fantastic, lucid answers to your questions about making WordPress go, which is a lot more than I can say if you asked me personally.
Amen to that one, my friend. And so I'll jump us into our first question here for the second half, and it goes like this. Hi, Brad and Dave. Have you ever thought of complementing your comic with a computer game, specifically a visual novel? They are relatively easy to make and close to interactive comics. The game could be easily integrated into the comics webpage as well. As always, love the show and keep the good advice and laughs coming, Helfried. So, Brad, visual novels or computer games, or we can even broaden it out, other aspects of broadening the universe of your comic, whether it be light animation or this and that. What are your thoughts about, specifically, though, a computer game, a visual novel set in the Evil Inc. universe?
Oh, I think it's a great idea. I would be super excited to release an Evil Inc. visual novel. I've seen some of the things they've done with that, and between it's not a fully animated project, so you don't have to animate entire a movie's worth of stuff. You can just animate sequences, and then the story takes over, and then it goes to the next animated sequence, or maybe the two work in conjunction. There's lots of cool things you can do with visual novels that really, really excite me. The problem here is the same problem that we have all the time as independent artists. For me to personally learn how to do all of that, to learn the amount of animation I'd need to learn, to learn the software that I need to put together to make this thing go, to learn about the marketplace for visual novels and all of those other things, it would take me away from my core competency, which is comics. I'm really good at comics. I can do comics. I can't do visual novels. And I've got to ask myself, if I want to pivot fully into visual novels and potentially leave comics behind, then that's something that's on my, is on the table for me. But for me, it's not going to be a very smart decision. And all of that time that I sink into trying to learn visual novels is time that, number one, the return on investment is not very clear. And number two, I'm actually taking time away from comics, which is something that I know I've got a good return on investment. I know that if I put out a certain amount of comics, if I make sure that I'm spending time doing good comics, if I'm really paying attention and drilling down on my writing and my art and my lettering, if I'm doing good comics, at some point I can put a book out, and I know the return on investment in that is very, very good. Like Dave said, when he puts a book out, he's aiming for 5 to 6 times the amount that it cost him to do it. And by the way, he's doing a Kickstarter, so it doesn't really cost him to do anything. He's just marking that off of his unit cost for production, right? Here's my point. I got a great return on investment being a comic artist. It's a shiny object to go over into a visual novel. It's very distracting. It's very attractive. Anything is attractive until you really understand fully the work that it takes into doing it. Of course, it's attractive. The grass is always greener on the other side. The problem is, as a small business person, I've got to avoid something like that because it can derail me and really hurt my career.
Yeah, I mean, there are many paths up the mountain in terms of how you can get to where you want to get to with your comic. But for me, the blessing and the curse of most of my adult life has been that I've always known that I wanted to be a cartoonist.
Yeah.
And the way I get to be a cartoonist is by really focusing for years and years and years, and now decades on end, to try to become a better cartoonist. And in so doing, my stories, my comics, my punchlines, my characters, my arcs get better. More readers come. I'm able to make a living. That allows me to keep going at this, right? And keep doing it.
Right.
Like Brad said, so many things come up over the course of your career that are a shiny object. And you can try to justify it by saying, well, it'll bring me a bigger overall audience if I insert whatever it is. If I stream, if I create animated versions of my comics, if I create a video game, if I create short animatics of my comics, if I make short movies of my comics, if I do voiceover stuff for my comics, that's fun. If I do, like you can imagine, you can insert 20 different shining objects here. Yeah. I personally want to be a cartoonist creating sequential art that lives on a screen or on a page and that I can monetize. And are there other things that I do that somewhat lift the tide for that boat of cartooning? Sure. You could argue this podcast in some respects kind of maybe brings in new readers. I don't think it does, but the short version is I have had in my own career a time where I was distracted by a shiny object. I really wanted to make a documentary about comics. Yeah. And for about 2.5 years, I was able to put about 25, 30 hours a week into my cartooning and 10 hours a week into working on the documentary. But when it came time to buckling down and editing the film, Brad, you remember I had to stop Sheldon and Drive for about a year so that I could finish editing that film. Right. And all well and good. I have zero regrets about doing it. But the fact is, sometimes in life, you got to make choices. And in that moment, I had to choose to stop my cartooning so that I could finish the shiny object that I started. And I a little bit forecast for myself that if I went down the video game or the visual novel or the animating my comics or regular streaming, that would limit what I could produce as a cartoonist.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to give you another thought on that, and that's this. When I by the way, I've got all those same wants, right? I'd love to have an Evil Inc. TV series. I'd love to have an Evil Inc. visual novel. I'd love to have all of that stuff. I'd love to see it in animation. I'd like to see it in an Evil Inc. video game. Sure, fantastic. Again, it's not a good fit for me to sit and do that as an independent and take that on because of all those things I said originally. But I would, okay, let me phrase it this way. Instead of giving up on the dream, what I do is double down on the comic and really try to make that comic super great, even better than it was last week, and build it to the point where I can ostensibly license that work to somebody else who knows how to do a visual novel, right? And then, of course, you go into all of the warnings about having a good contract and all like that. But I would license Evil Inc. To be a visual novel and be involved in the creative process, but not have to do the actual work, to leave that to people who grew up wanting to do that or having that skill set. Licensing, yes. Taking it on as an independent project, no. Right? Why? Because I know my limits and I know what I can do and I know where I get my best return on investment for my time. And it ain't taking on and learning new things at this point. It's by doubling down on trying to make that comic as good as it can be.
And a different angle to view this question is because we get a version of this question every couple of years, and again, there's no necessarily a shot on this because there's nothing wrong with wanting to make a visual novel or a computer game about your comic. We are creative people and our minds think creatively, and we know with the application of time and effort, we could get good at a thing, right? Yep. But whenever we get a question like this, though, a part of me always thinks, has a person given their best on a comic for 3, 4, 5 years, and they've reached sort of the natural ceiling of what they can get in terms of an audience or an audience response. And so their mind starts to go, well, what if I juggled as well when I did the comic?
Right.
Or what if
Right.
I streamed? Or what if I did voiceovers? Or what if I did animation? Or what if and yes, maybe that could work. We've seen examples of all of those maybe working.
Mhm.
But the fact is, by doing those things, you're putting less time and application and effort into making the comic better. You're doing this other thing. But now you're also kind of doing two things not great. And also maybe you're not acknowledging the fact that you did reach the natural ceiling on a project and you're still trying to squeeze blood from that stone, you know?
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying, Brad?
No, I think you're right. Sometimes I wonder, just looking at myself, sometimes I notice that when I've hit a plateau in my own work, in my own creative efforts, sometimes it's a little extra easy to get distracted by a shiny object because this thing that I'm doing now is boring because I've plateaued at it, right? I'm not necessarily getting new and inspirational things that happen from it. So it's a little bit easy to get distracted. And of course, what we know looking back over both of us having been doing this for well over 20 years is that no plateau is permanent, right? There's always you push forward and then there's another little jump. Right. And all of a sudden, a new you've unlocked a new challenge, unlocked a new talent, unlocked a new way of thinking or doing or skill. No plateau is permanent, but it's really easy to get distracted while you're on the plateau. Right. Because sometimes it gets a little boring on the plateau. Let's face it. And that's when some of these things start to come up. And it's like, oh, yeah, I could do this other thing because I've clearly plateaued here. Right. I've got this under control. Now I can do this other thing. And I think that can be a danger.
Well, the only living example that I know of, and there's no need to say names, but they were an incredibly talented cartoonist that started to do visual novels and video games. And I think the most instructive thing to take away from their life lesson is they kind of stopped making comics.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. You can like two things. I could be a guitarist that also loves stage dance. But if the problem is if I do more and more stage dance, at some point I'm stopping playing guitar, you know, right? So what I'm getting at here is the only real world example I have in my life of someone saying, oh, yeah, I love visual novels. And wouldn't that be easy to try? And I think I could do that. And I have the skill set to do it. By the way, it turns out they did. They're amazing at it. But it's also, to me, really instructive that when they walked down that path, they kind of stopped making comics.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. So, Dave, I think we've got time for another question from our Patreon backers. And it's been a whole 5 minutes since we talked about social media. So let's take one on social media. This one comes in from Douglas, who says, hey, Brad and Dave, I'm a working cartoonist and my career feels bizarre. I've had all the luck in the world in real life and none in social media. Social media has done almost nothing for my career. I don't even expect what I do to go viral because it's pretty niche. But I want growth if I'm posting consistently, and I just can't ever seem to grow my following. So here's my question. I basically made a career without social media at this point, with Facebook being geriatric and Twitter in shambles. Should I just sort of button it up and party like it's 2050 or 2005? Because after years of no meaningful growth on any social media platform, it just seems like I'm wasting time that could be spent better at the drafting table. Lots of love for the show, Doug. So, Dave, here's a person that says, hey, I put together my career. I'm very comfortable with where I am right now. Should I be spending time on social media?
So I have two answers for this because the two things can be true at the same time, right? And so in my two answers, I think are both versions are two very different answers that both are true. Number one is, in my own experience, and I think in a lot of people's experiences, over the last decade, social media has become less and less effective in terms of monetizing or actualizing your audience, in terms of spending money, supporting you physically, supporting you with dollars, supporting you with purchases or Patreon or Kickstarters. When I go to look at a Kickstarter's numbers, my mailing list, my website are still the main drivers of the people that came out and supported. Instagram, which has my hugest numbers of all, is like 6 people at the end of a Kickstarter. Twitter, which has far less numbers, has 15 people, right? And I'm sure a year from now, if I kickstart with Threads, I'll get 6 and Blue Sky will have 2 and it doesn't matter what. But you go to my mailing list, it's 500 people, 1,000 people. You go to my website, it's a couple hundred people, whatever it is. What I'm getting at there is, so my first thing is, social media has inarguably proven to be really ineffective at terms of taking a big audience and translating them into a monetizable, actionable audience that helps support your career. That's number one. Number two is, and this is a weird metaphor, but I'm going to go into it. Last week, when my family was in Wyoming, we went to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has this fish hatchery. And now I know this is going to sound weird, but it's a fish hatchery because at some point in the late 18th century, early 19th century, American railroad companies seeded fish into Northwest rivers so that East Coasters would ride the rails and come catch the fish that they knew, right? And so what happened is these fish slowly outpaced the natural fish in the Northwest. And so what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is doing is they're reintroducing trout, reintroducing other fish, and at huge volumes such that these fish will have a greater survivability rate than the East Coast fish. And slowly over the decades, they'll start to winnow them out. Anyway, long story short, when I went to this fish hatchery, Brad, they start with 500,000 fertilized fish eggs, right?
Wow.
And then from those 500,000 to go to the next stage, they end up with 300,000 hatchlings. And then the next stage is they end up with about 250,000 fingerling fish. That's a fish that's roughly the size of your finger. And then, you go to the next stage, a yearling fish is, they get down to about 100,000. And then eventually they release 50,000 trout into the river. Great, good for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. But they had to start with the 500,000 fish in order to winnow down to those 50,000 fish. And a little bit social media is like that. Like, yes, you have built this whole career on your website and on your mailing list, and so has Brad, so have I. That's great. That's a wonderful thing. But eventually those people will die. Eventually they'll move on. Eventually their taste will change. And you need to replace them from somewhere. So the question is, well, you've got two choices. You've got conventions, which we've said in the past are increasingly hard and hit and miss to use, or you've got social media. You've got word of mouth on social media. And so do I think that Instagram is super ineffective? Yes. Do I think that I can't monetize that audience to save my life, even though it's, 40, 50,000 people, whatever it is? Yes. I can get 5 people from them to back a Kickstarter. But by appealing to those 50,000 people, like the U.S. Fish Hatchery that I was talking about, I get down to a percentage of those people join my mailing list or go to my website or jump on a Kickstarter. I need that huge number that does nothing in order to get to the small number that does something.
Right. No, I agree 100% with what you just said. And again, it's why we harp on making sure that you've got things like a website and an email mailing list and things like that, because that's where you're sending all of those fish that you're casting a net for. That's the river that you're finally going to send them to, right? That's where they can become productive parts of your business. That's the whole point. I don't have anything necessarily to add to what you said there, other than listen, if what I'm hearing is, hey, I'm perfectly comfortable from where I am. I don't need to grow at all. I don't need anything. Should I worry about social media? Well, of course, if you're happy, then no, you don't need to worry about it. If you did need to grow, or if you wanted to grow and you wanted to use social media as part of that, the first thing I'm going to look at, because I having done this for so long and seeing how so many artists apply social media, first thing I'm going to ask you is if you haven't been getting any kind of growth on social media, my question to you is, are you using it right? Right. Are you doing it right? Right. Like, so, and by the way, there's almost 300 episodes of Comic Lab where we talk a lot about the right way to do social media, but let's just take a couple off the top of my head. Number one, the 4 C's. Are you doing the 4 C's of social media? Right. Are you doing content, commercial, curation, and of course, kindness? right? Are you doing that? And you can find lots of episodes. I'm not going to go through all of it again. Also, are you making your comic so that it can be read in its entirety on that social media platform? In other words, not just a crop of one of your panels, just not just a teaser of a panel, because of course nobody's going to follow you for a crop of a panel. Right. Of course, nobody's going to follow you for a teaser of a panel where you say, oh, go to this other place and read the whole thing. Nobody's going to do that. And all you got to do, if you think I'm full of crap, all you got to do is watch anybody using their phone. Next time you're out in the wild, watch how quickly they make their content decisions. It can't even be measured in nanoseconds, the way that thumb flicks its way up the screen. You are not going to get anybody to follow you by posting a portion. And I see it all the time. Drives me crazy. Here's a crop of my panel. Well, no, you know what? That ain't going to work. Nobody's following that. Right. So in other words, if it's a big if, maybe you're perfectly happy. And by the way, that's great. You're like Dave said earlier, there's lots of paths to the top of the mountain. You found your path. Walk that path. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. But if you wanted to do better, and if social media, and by the way, social media is still going to be a part of that for the whole reason Dave elaborated on, starting with those small trouts and ending up with big trouts. If you wanted to do that, first thing you got to ask yourself, if you're not getting good results, are you following good practices? Are you doing the best practices on social media? If not, it might be the reason why you're not getting any traction.
I actually really agree with you, Brad. I also personally think that they might be doing social media wrong, with the caveat that some comics do better on social media than others, depending on how self-contained they are, depending on whether there's a long story you need to know to understand it. Right. I understand that, but I agree with Brad that you might want to look into and take a really serious look at how you're using social media. And again, we have whole episodes devoted to that. Look for the 4 C's on Comic Lab, and you'll find them. We have whole episodes devoted to that. But I agree with Brad. But I also want to say, and this goes back to that cartoonist that we were talking about at the top of the show, for whom there's this sudden demarcation in their career of, I had a thing and now I no longer have a thing. I had a job at this major publisher. Now I no longer have a job at this major publisher. And I want to tell you that all those little annoyances are better than suddenly waking up and finding out that your audience, which you haven't been continuing to grow in small steps over the years, has not had a replacement rate. And suddenly you wake up and you go, oh my gosh, a lot of my readers have either died, lost track of me, or changed their taste. And I never replaced them. So like we said with that artist at the very beginning, is it annoying to do social media, especially when there's 16 different fragmented social medias right now? Yeah. Yes. Is there very little immediate return on what seems like an hour a week, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week? Yes, absolutely. But do you a little bit have to do it in order to have a replacement rate over the years and over the decades? Because what Brad and I are saying is great. You have built a career in the real world that doesn't need social media. That's awesome. First of all, that's awesome. Right. Secondly, though, those people are going to die, they're going to move on, or they're going to change tastes, right? Or they're going to lose track of you somehow. And you need to have something that's feeding in at a replacement rate for when they do. And so social media is annoying, but it might be the small annoyance that's worth doing over the next years and decades. Yeah. And listen, speaking of small annoyances that are worth doing, it's time for me to read the outro to the show. Well, listen. I don't even know how to process that. Well, you know, I'll tell you what I'm thinking, because whenever I'm reading this, as I'm reading it, it's like, this is the part where usually when I'm listening to a podcast, this is the part I'm hitting the stop button, right? And going on to another one. I don't listen to the outros, but it's really important that we do it because we got a lot of important stuff to tell you, like this. I got to tell you that you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics. Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evilcomic.com. And my friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of the comics documentary Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com. And a reminder that when Brad invites his wife out on a date for a Friday night, he goes, I guess we got to do this. I guess this is important. We got to do this part.
You don't know how close you are right now.
The Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode like this one that came into us from Mon, who says, no question this time, I just wanted to share that I quite often listen to the podcast on speaker around the house, and my partner will hear it from elsewhere in the house. The other day, he came to me and said, those laughs pierce through everything else I can hear. So I apologized and offered to turn it down, and he said, no, I like it. It's so good to hear people having such a good, hearty laughs. I couldn't agree more.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I hope they enjoy our fantastic transition to the end of the show this week, Mon. That was great.
Hopefully they didn't turn it off.
Yeah, exactly. Comic Lab is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab, which you are going to join us in before September 21st, remember, so you can get that free bonus San Diego Comic-Con exclusive episode. I guess free is not the right word there. It's not free. You got to join us at the $5 level.
Right.
But it is a bonus. It is a bonus for those that join. So I will say that twice, patreon.com/Comic Lab.
It's free for $5.
The web cartoonist mantra. Oh, yeah, that's free.
Yeah.
$5.
Yeah.